The cafeteria of the Interstellar Academy was usually a place of loud metallic clanking and alien chatter. But today, you could hear a pin drop. It was silent, the kind of silence that happens right before a car crash. In the center of the room stood Kalen. He was a 3-meter-tall Ursa Vax, a creature that looked like a nightmare made of muscle and dark fur. His claws were long black and sharp enough to slice through a starship's hull. He wasn't just a bully, he was a biological killing machine, and right now, he was looming over a tiny human girl named Maya. Maya was sitting at a small table, scrawling through her digital textbook. Compared to Kalen, she looked like a toy. She didn't have armor, she didn't have claws. She just had a faded hoodie and a half-eaten apple. Kalen leaned down, his massive shadow swallowing her completely. In his clawed hand, he held a glowing device, a biometric scanner. In this academy, bullies didn't just hit you, they used tech to prove they were superior. This scanner was designed to read prey response. It measured adrenaline, sweat, and most importantly, heart rate. "You humans are a joke," Kalen growled. The sound was so deep it made the juice in Maya's cup vibrate. "You come from a death world, yet look at you. Your skin is soft. Your bones are like dry twigs. You are nothing but walking snacks for real predators." He reached out and pressed the cold metal of the scanner against Maya's temple. "Let's see how loud your heart screams, little monkey," he sneered. Kalen flicked a switch, and the scanner synced with the giant holographic screens on the cafeteria walls. Every student from 100 different planets looked up. They expected to see a jagged, spiking mountain range of lines. They expected to see a heart rate of 200 or 300 beats per minute, the sound of a heart trying to explode from pure terror. But the screen flickered to life, and the room went from silent to ghostly. The line was flat, not dead flat, but perfectly steady. 60, 60, 60. The number sat there glowing a calm, cool green. Maya didn't look up. She didn't shake. She didn't even stop chewing her apple. She looked like someone waiting for a bus, not someone facing a monster. "The machine is broken," Kalen roared. He slammed his other fist onto the table, cracking the reinforced plastic. The bang was like a gunshot, making every other alien in the room jump in their seats. Kalen's breathing became heavy. His own heart rate was visible on his wrist, Link climbing to a dangerous 180. He was getting angry because he couldn't find her fear. He grabbed the scanner and shoved it harder against her head, his claws digging slightly into her skin. "I said Syria," he hissed, his breath smelling like old meat. The crowd held their breath. They waited for the spike. They waited for Maya to cry or beg. But the green number on the screen didn't budge. 60 beats per minute. Maya finally looked up. Her blue eyes weren't wide with fear. They were heavy, almost sleepy. She looked at Kalen the way a person looks at a fly that won't stop buzzing. Slowly, she took a sip of her water, swallowed, and whispered in a voice that carried through the entire silent hall. "It's not broken, Kalen. I'm just bored. Is this the best you can do? Because I have a math test in 10 minutes that's way scarier than you." The cafeteria exploded into whispers. No one had ever insulted an Ursa Vax like that. Kalen's face turned a dark purple. He realized that for the first time in his life, he wasn't the predator. He was the entertainment, and that was his first big mistake. The silence that followed Maya's insult was heavy. It wasn't just quiet, it was the kind of silence that feels like the air has been sucked out of the room. Kalen, the massive Ursa Vax, stood frozen. His species was built on a single biological truth, the strong command and the weak tremble. In his culture, if someone didn't tremble, it meant the universe was broken. He looked at the biometric scanner again. It was still showing that steady, rhythmic 60 BPM. To Kalen, that number wasn't just a heartbeat anymore. It was a countdown. "You're a death worlder." Kalen hissed, his voice dropped into a dangerous, wet growl. "I've read the files on Earth. It's a graveyard planet. Gravity that crushes bones, storms that rip mountains apart, and predators that eat their own young. But look at you. You have no fur, no natural armor. You are a scavenger. You survived because your ancestors hid in holes while the real monsters fought above ground." He was trying to convince himself as much as the crowd. He needed Maya to be afraid. If she wasn't afraid, then his entire identity as an apex predator was a lie. To prove his point, Kalen reached down with one massive, clawed hand. He grabbed Maya's heavy, reinforced metal lunch tray. With a roar of effort, he twisted his wrist. The sound was horrifying, a high-pitched screech of protesting steel. In seconds, the thick metal tray was crushed into a useless, jagged ball of scrap. He dropped it onto the floor with a heavy thud that echoed like a drum. Around them, students from 10 different galaxies backed away. The Zilari, thin and insect-like, clicked their mandibles in fear. The Gruul, massive rock-skinned beings, lowered their heads. Everyone felt the coming violence. It was thick in the air, like the smell of ozone before a lightning strike. But Maya didn't flinch. She didn't even blink when a piece of the metal tray flew past her cheek, missing her by an inch. She just sat there, her hands resting loosely on her lap. The scanner on the screen stayed at 60 BPM. "Is that your party trick?" Maya asked. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the silent cafeteria, it sounded like a crack of thunder. She looked at the crushed metal ball on the floor, then back up at the 3-meter-tall monster. "On Earth," she said calmly, "we have a saying. The loudest dog is always the one most afraid. You're making a lot of noise, Kaylin. You're breaking furniture. You're screaming. You're sweating. Do you know what that tells me?" Kaylin leaned in, his nose inches from hers. "Tell me, little scavenger. Tell me before I tear your throat out." "It tells me you've never actually been in a real fight," Maya said. She finally stood up. She was so short that she only came up to the middle of his chest, but the energy in the room shifted instantly. "In a real fight, you don't waste breath talking. You don't waste energy showing off. You save everything for the moment of impact." The crowd gasped. The biometric scanner flickered. For a split second, everyone expected the number to jump. They expected the human fear to finally arrive. Instead, the number did something impossible. It dropped to 58. Kylan stepped back, a look of genuine confusion crossing his face. "Why? Why is it going down? Why aren't you running?" "Because," Maya said, taking a slow step toward him, "on my planet, we don't just survive the monsters. We hunted them until they were extinct. We didn't have claws, Kaylin. We didn't have 10-inch teeth. We had something much worse. We had the ability to stay calm while the world burned." She looked around at the hundreds of alien students watching them. "You all think humans are weak because we're small. You think we're harmless because we smile and follow the rules. But you're forgetting one thing. We only made those rules to protect people like you from people like us." Kylan felt a drop of cold sweat run down his spine. It was a sensation he had never felt before. He was the biggest, strongest student in the academy. He had never been challenged. But looking into Maya's eyes, he didn't see a girl. He saw a void. He saw thousands of years of human warfare, persistence hunting, and cold, calculated survival. "I'm going to give you one chance, Kaylin," Maya said, her voice sounding like a predator's purr. "Pick up that metal ball, walk away, and never say the word scavenger to me again." Kaylin's pride fought with his instinct. His pride told him to strike. His instinct told him that if he moved a muscle, something terrible was going to happen. He looked at the screen one last time. 57 BPM. She was getting calmer. The rest of the students were now standing on chairs, trying to get a better view. This wasn't just a cafeteria fight anymore. This was a biological anomaly. A human girl was mentally dismantling an Ursa, Vax without moving a finger. Kaylin's claws extended, clicking against the floor. He wasn't going to walk away. He couldn't. His species' honor was on the line. He took a deep breath, his chest expanding to twice its size, and prepared to strike. "You're dead, human," he bellowed. But as he raised his arm, he noticed something. Maya's hand was already moving, not toward him, but toward a small, heavy water bottle on the table. She wasn't reaching for it like a girl. She was reaching for it like a soldier reaching for a grenade. The escalation was over. The fight was beginning. The cafeteria air grew freezing cold. It wasn't the air conditioning, it was the atmosphere. Kylan had lost his mind. He was no longer just a bully. He was a cornered animal trying to prove he was still king. When the Academy's security droids, heavy, hovering metal spheres, tried to intervene, Kylan didn't even look at them. With a backhand swing that sounded like a whip cracking, he sent the droids flying into the walls, where they exploded in a shower of sparks and blue oil. "Look at me," Kylan roared. He lunged forward, his massive claws closing around the collar of Maya's hoodie. He lifted her off the ground until her feet were dangling a meter in the air. He held her close, his giant, wet snout inches from her nose. "Perform for me!" His breath was a foul mix of raw meat and ozone hot enough to singe hair. Anyone else, any other species in the known galaxy, would have had a heart attack from the sheer pressure of his presence. But then, the large holographic screen behind them flickered. The biometric scanner attached to Maya's wrist began to beep. It wasn't the frantic beep, beep, beep of a panic attack. It was a slow, steady chime, 55, 50, 45. The numbers were falling. To the students watching, it looked like Maya was fading away. Her face remained perfectly still, her eyes fixed on Kaylin's forehead. She wasn't even fighting to get down. She was just waiting. "How?" Kaylin barked, a cruel triumph in his eyes. "Look at the screen. Your little human heart has given up. You're dying of fright before I even get to break you." Suddenly, an old professor from the Xylos race, a wise, Vulcan-like species known for studying ancient biology, stood up from his table in the corner. His 3 eyes were wide with a terror that surpassed anything Callan was feeling. "Callan, drop her. Drop her this instant," the professor screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. Callan laughed, a deep, rattling sound. "Why, Professor? Are you worried I'll get human blood on the floor? She's already dead. Her heart is stopping." "You ignorant fool," the professor yelled, stepping forward but keeping his distance.
"She isn't dying. You don't understand human history."
"Humans are not like us. They are persistence hunters. For millions of years, they didn't kill with claws, they killed with focus. When a human's heart rate drops in the middle of a life-threatening crisis, it means they have entered the zone. It is a biological state of pure, calculated lethality." The professor pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "Look at her eyes, Kylan. She isn't feeling fear. She isn't feeling anger. Her brain is diverting every single drop of oxygen and blood away from her emotions and into her motor cortex. She is optimizing. Her body is calculating exactly how many kilograms of force it will take to shatter your windpipe. HFY Sci-Fi. The room went deathly silent. Everyone looked at Maya, 40 BPM. The green line on the screen was almost a straight horizontal path. Maya's breathing had become so shallow it was invisible. She looked like a statue made of ice. Callan felt a sudden, sharp chill. He looked down at the girl he was holding. For the first time, he noticed her hands. They weren't clawing at his arm. They weren't shaking. Her fingers were held in a strange, precise position, the thumb tucked, the palm rigid. "The zone," the professor whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's a trance. To her, the world has slowed down. You are moving in slow motion to her right now, Callan. She isn't looking at your face. She's looking at your structural weaknesses." Maya's lips moved. It was a tiny, ghostly movement. 32, she whispered. "What?" Callan stammered, his grip loosening just a fraction. "What did you say?" 32 ways to end this, Maya said. Her voice didn't sound like a teenage girl anymore. It sounded like a computer. "I've settled on the one that hurts you the most but keeps you alive to remember it." The scanner reached 38 BPM. In that moment, the entire academy realized the truth. Humans weren't the weak species that needed protection. They were the species that had practiced the art of the cold kill for 100,000 years. And Callan had just invited the most dangerous hunter in the room to play. Maya's hand began to rise slowly toward Callan's throat. The air in the cafeteria felt like it had turned into solid glass. No one breathed. No one moved. On the massive screens, the number 40 glowed like a cold, emerald eye. Callan's grip was like iron, but Maya didn't struggle. To her, in the zone, Callan wasn't a monster, he was a map of vulnerabilities. She saw the pulsing of his carotid artery, the tension in his elbow joint, and the specific cluster of nerves on his wrist that acted as a biological off switch. Then it happened. Maya's hand moved. It wasn't a swing. It wasn't a desperate clawing. It was a strike so fast and precise that it looked like a blur of light. Her 2 fingers snapped forward, hitting a tiny gap in Callan's thick fur, right at the base of his wrist. An electric shock of pure agony shot up Callan's arm. His nervous system, built for power but not for such surgical precision, simply shut down. His massive hand opened involuntarily. He dropped Maya. She didn't fall like a normal girl. She landed on the polished floor with the silent, heavy grace of a mountain cat. There was no stumble, no gasp for air. She stood up slowly, her eyes never leaving Callan's terrified face. "You speak of death worlds," Maya said. Her voice was flat, devoid of any human warmth. It sounded like ice grinding against stone. "But you don't understand the evolution of the hunter. My ancestors didn't have your claws. They didn't have your size. They hunted mammoths, beasts 10 times your size, with nothing but sharpened sticks and patience." She took a step forward. Callan, for the first time in his life, took a step back. They would follow a beast for 3 days. Maya continued, her voice echoing in the dead, silent hall. Through snow, through mud, through blood. They wouldn't sleep. They wouldn't eat. They just waited for the monster to get tired. They waited for the moment the predator realized it had become the prey. "I've only been waiting for 3 minutes, Callan, and you're already exhausted." Callan's face twisted into a mask of pure rage and humiliation. He couldn't accept this, not in front of the whole academy. He roared, a sound that should have shattered Maya's eardrums, and swung his other claw in a wide, murderous arc. It was a blow meant to decapitate her. Maya didn't duck. She didn't run. She stepped into his guard. She moved into the dead space, where his long arms couldn't reach her. As his fist came down, she reached up. With a grip that felt like hydraulic pincers, she caught his massive 3-fingered fist with one hand. The impact sent a shockwave through the floor, cracking the tiles beneath her feet. But Maya didn't move an inch. Her arm stayed locked, holding back a creature 3 times her weight. The biometric scanner on the screen flashed, 40 BPM. The crowd of aliens was in shock. Some were weeping from the sheer intensity of the human presence. They weren't looking at a student anymore. They were looking at an apex predator that had been dormant for centuries, now fully awake and hungry. Maya looked up at Kaylin. She wasn't angry. Anger is an emotion, and emotions use up oxygen. She was a machine. She was a calculation. Your heart is at 190, she said softly, watching the pulse in his neck. Your muscles are full of lactic acid. Your vision is tunneling. You're already losing. And I haven't even started my heart yet. She twisted his wrist just a fraction of a millimeter. The sound of Kaylin's heavy bones groaning under the pressure was like wood snapping in a fire. Kaylin, the invincible warrior, fell to his knees. He was staring at her with wide, wet eyes, realizing that the girl he had called a scavenger was actually a descendant of the most successful killers in galactic history. Please, Kaylin whispered, the word barely escaping his throat. Maya leaned in, her face a mask of cold, terrifying calm. The mammoths probably felt the same way, she said. But the hunters never stopped. Neither do I. The cafeteria was so quiet that the only sound was the hum of the broken security droids. Maya leaned in, her shadow falling over Kaylin's trembling face. She was close enough to whisper, and her voice was as cold as the vacuum of space. Listen carefully, Kaylin, she said, her eyes boring into his. If you ever touch me or my friends or even look toward our table again, I'll stop counting my heartbeats. I'll start counting your broken ribs instead, and I promise you, I won't stop until I reach a very high number. Do you understand? Kaylin didn't speak. He couldn't. His throat was tight with a fear he didn't know existed. He simply nodded, his massive head bobbing frantically like a child's toy. On his own wrist, his biometric scanner was screaming. The red lights were flashing so fast they blurred. His heart was racing at a lethal pace, causing the device to emit a thin trail of smoke before it finally hissed and short-circuited. He was a broken warrior, defeated by a girl who hadn't even broken a sweat. Maya let go of his wrist. The moment she released her grip, Kaylin collapsed backward. He didn't try to stand. He scrambled away on all fours, his heavy tail tucked between his legs, disappearing into the crowd of stunned students. Maya didn't watch him leave. She didn't celebrate. She simply turned back to her table, pulled out her chair, and sat down. She picked up her digital book and flipped it open to page 42, the chapter on galactic history. With a calm hand, she took another bite of her apple, the crunch echoing through the hall like a gavel. Above her, the giant holographic screens began to change. The terrifying green line, the flat line of a predator, began to curve, 45, 55, 65. Slowly, it settled at a perfect, healthy 70 BPM. The zone was closed. The ice in her veins had melted back into warm human blood. The terrifying machine that had just dismantled an apex predator had gone back to sleep, replaced once again by a quiet student in a faded hoodie. The professor, still standing in the corner, finally exhaled. He wiped the sweat from his brow and sat down, his hands shaking as he pulled out his notebook. He began to write a warning that would later be sent to every military commander in the sector. Do not mistake human peace for human weakness. Their calm is not a lack of power. It is the cage they build to keep the monster inside. The news of what happened in the cafeteria spread through the Interstellar Academy like wildfire. By the next morning, the human heartbeat became a legend. Students who used to walk down the middle of the halls now stepped aside whenever they saw a human. They didn't do it because they were being bullied. They did it because they finally understood the biological truth of the third planet. No one ever raised their voice near Maya again. No one tried to test her soft skin or her weak bones. Even the teachers spoke a little softer when she was in the room. Kaylin, once the king of the academy, moved to a different sector entirely, his reputation shattered along with his pride. As for Maya, she remained the same. She was polite, she was quiet, and she was always on time for her tests. But sometimes when the hallways got too loud or a new student tried to act tough, she would look up from her book. Her eyes would go just a little bit colder, and the room would instantly go silent. The galaxy had learned a vital lesson that day. They learned that humans are the only species that can choose to turn off their emotions to become something much more efficient. They learned that a screaming alien is a threat you can prepare for, but a quiet human is a disaster you can only hope to survive. The most dangerous thing in the universe isn't a roar, a claw, or a giant fleet of ships. It's a small human girl with a heart rate that refuses to go up. Because when a human stops feeling, the rest of the galaxy should start praying.